which you're going to talk us through. So tell us about your plans for the department and what you're going to do as Culture Secretary.
Okay, this is, I mean, not only is this really intimidating, but I was just saying to Polly when we came in that it feels just like being back at school, and I did not do well at school. And then I've just looked over and seen the principal of my local college in the audience. So now I'm terrified about the report card that I'm going to get when we get out. She's marking me. Just first of all, thank you so much for hosting this. It's the first time that a culture secretary has been able to come to Labour Party conference for 15 years, and it's an incredible privilege to be in a position. And I did first of all want to just say thank you, because it's thanks to those of you in this room who have endured the long last 14 years and done the work to get us to this point, that we are going to have the chance to. So excited to be here in this brief, because I believe that many of the problems that we have in this country come back to the fact that over the last decade and a half, we've found multiple ways to divide ourselves from one another. We've had a government that has pushed and pursued the culture wars and tried to pit us against one another. And it's our ambition that when we turn to face the nation again, we'll face a far more self-confident country, where people in every community know that their contribution is seen and valued, and where they see themselves reflected in our national story. And for far too many people right now, that is not the case. And that's what I think we can achieve together, opening up choices and chances to people in every part of this country to live the richer, larger, more dignified lives that are the goal of every socialist government. So in our department, we've set about to do three things. The first is to help Rachel grow the economy by creating good jobs in every community. And the creative industries, whether it's film, TV, tourism, gaming, advertising, these are some of the fastest growing areas of the economy, with almost uniquely the opportunity to provide good, well-paid jobs outside of London and the South East. Look at the work that Tracy Brabin's doing in West Yorkshire, using Bradford and the City of Culture to create the most buzzing, lively arts scene hub. And she's gone further than that, working with all of the mayors on One Creative North, the cultural corridor from the film industry in Sunderland, all the way down through West Yorkshire to Birmingham, where Stephen Knight, the founder of Peaky Blinders, is creating the Birmingham Film Academy. He's got a pipeline of investment from the likes of Netflix and Amazon, and he's recruiting 20% of the local workforce from the 5 most deprived postcodes in Birmingham. This is how we're going to change lives. The second thing that we want to do is to enable people to live richer, larger lives. And Bridget and I have wasted no time at all in kicking off the curriculum review to put sports, art, music and culture back at the centre of the curriculum where it belongs. And the third thing that we're aiming to do is to create a far more self-confident country again, one that is not just comfortable in its diversity, but knows that we are richer and stronger for the diverse cultural inheritance and contribution of people from very different backgrounds in every part of Britain. And so I'm working with Angela Rayner on how we make sure that we have a more cohesive country. She chairs a committee across Cabinet, community cohesion. And one of the things that we're doing is making sure that people are reflected in the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves as a nation. So just last week, I went to talk to the Royal Television Society about the fact that TV is one of the most exclusive industries in the world. And there's been huge strides over the last few years of the BBC moving to Media City, of Channel 4 moving to Leeds, and of trying to drive more commissioning and content outside of London. But only 7% of the TV industry is working class, and 88% of the jobs are still based in London and the South East. And while many of the jobs may have moved in recent years, all of the commissioners and all of the heads of department are still based in London. And that is a problem, because who decides what is made decides what is told. And too many people don't see themselves reflected in our national story. And I want that to change so that they know that their contribution is seen and valued. So they're the three things that we're aiming to do. It's quite a lot, really. But when I look back at Labour governments over the course of history, whether it's the Attlee government and the parks and recreation movement, because working class people deserve the right to clean air and green open spaces as much as anybody else, whether it was Jenny Lee, the first ever arts minister under the Wilson government, whose arts white paper, first ever in the country, Arts for Everyone Everywhere, was an absolutely landmark change in getting funding to every community and enabling children to live those richer, larger lives. Blair government, opening with Chris Smith and Gordon Brown, opening up our national museums to the nation, regardless of ability to pay, because they belong to us and we need to be back at the centre of our own story. I feel really confident that over the next 5 years, the work that we're going to do together is going to leave that sort of legacy again for this country, and I couldn't be more excited to be part of it.
Brilliant, thank you. One of the things I did, knowing that I've whipped around the audience before you came, and I've crowdsourced lots of questions, so I can pepper them through. But we had a question from Sally, which was about access to arts and culture. Those themes around how you use arts and culture to unite people, how you use arts and culture, make the access to arts and culture equal.
Yeah, so this what's happened over the course of the last decade and a half is that as the state, national state, and councils in particular have had harsh, deep cuts, arts, sport, culture, music have often been the first things to go. And private philanthropists have stepped up to try and fill some of that gap. But much of that funding has gone into a handful of very large institutions in particular parts of the country. And what it's left is cultural deserts, really, because alongside that, as well as, you all know the story of the Oldham Coliseum, and thanks to the great work of Jim McMahon and the local council, that is being reopened and will be saved for the community. But too often the story is of loss and decline, and then communities left without a cultural offer at all. And when you pair that with the absolute deliberate vandalism of the curriculum, where they trashed art subjects as soft subjects and Mickey Mouse subjects, they narrowed the curriculum and they cut enrichment funding. What it's meant is that for many young people, that opportunity to live richer, larger lives is just simply not there. And if it's not there in your community, you can't access it. So we're working with the big institutions to see what more we can do to get them into schools and out of London and into communities. We're also looking at a place-based philanthropy strategy to help fill that gap, building on the work that the likes of Jason Stockwood have done in Grimsby, where he bought the football club and is working with the community to use it as an anchor institution to regenerate Grimsby and to create economic growth and good jobs and opportunities for the young people there. And we're also conducting a review, we're about to kick it off, of the Arts Council to make sure that funding is getting not just to the parts of the country where it's needed, but to support local people's priorities, not coming in and imposing things on people, but actually working with what is already there and putting rocket boosters under it to help it thrive. But it's something that we're really, really passionate about. And one of the reasons that we are, and I'm sorry, I won't take this long to answer all the questions, I promise. But one of the reasons that we're really passionate about it is a few years ago, I sat down with Danny Boyle. Some of you will know him, the filmmaker who was responsible for the Olympics opening ceremony in 2012. And I was very fortunate to be a new MP at that time. I was Tessa Giles PPS on the Olympics. And like a lot of people, I watched that opening ceremony and felt really inspired by the honesty about our history in all its light and dark, the story of ordinary working class people, ordinary people who've done extraordinary things throughout our history, and that vision for the future, that very progressive vision, not a Labour vision, a national vision for who we are as a people, comfortable in our complexity and our diversity. And it felt that that was the last moment when the whole nation could really come together around something. And then we had the Indie Ref in Scotland, we had the rising support for far-right parties, then we had Brexit, and we found all these ways to divide ourselves from each other. And I said to him, where has that country gone? And he said to me, it's still there. It's just waiting for someone to give voice to it. And that's my job, that's our job now that we're in government. We're a better country than the governments that we've had for the last 14 years. This is who we really are, and that country will be heard again.
Jumping right forward from that 2012 moment and what it said about us as a country to this summer and everything that happened with the riots over this summer. I know this was personal for you. There were people from Wigan in Southport. what was your role in the riot response, and how do we're in a very different place from 2012.
Yeah.
The challenge is so much harder. We're so much more divided. How do you rise to that?
So it is, but there are a few things. I mean, we've dealt with this in Wigan for years because we've had a consistent history of far right idiots coming to our town to try and stir up trouble. And actually our history is the history of working class people driving them out of town over and over again for the last 100 years. And we've been massively supported in that effort by our local football club, our rugby league club, and the church. They're the three institutions that I always reach for when it feels that the sort of embers of discontent are crackling again, and people are being pulled into that kind of populist far right rhetoric. And so, when we've had this previously in Wigan, we've had priests and vicars out doing sermons about tolerance and diversity. We've had the football club and the rugby league club standing against hate and speaking for the town. And so over the summer, one of the things that I did was hit the phones and speak to sports clubs, particularly football clubs in many of the local areas. The EFL, I have to say, were absolutely wonderful at helping us to reach those. Lots of Labour MPs and Burnham, all very helpful at just picking up the phone and helping us to get through to them, because football clubs, sports clubs, but football clubs in particular, often speak for a place. They almost, they're symbolic of our identity, and they transcend divisions in a way that politics at those moments often can't. And so we had people like Sunderland, amazing club, out saying, look, this is not who we are. We don't want this here. We're better than this. And people were really responding. It gave the ordinary, decent, silent majority something to rally round and make sure that they were heard, not just the far right thugs. And then the second thing was that we did... what it impressed for me was the importance of local and regional media, because while the national media was telling a story about the violence and the racism and the attacks on the police, which was an important part of the story to tell, the local papers were telling a very different story about Nans against Nazis. And we had Wigan against Muppets in Wigan, and Love Pies Hate Racism was another one. But there were ordinary people coming out across the country, and they are the majority in our towns, and they were standing up to this hate and standing up to this nonsense, and they were protecting the charities. One of our asylum charities was targeted online, and they went out when there was meant to be an attack on this charity and lined the streets to protect them, and they did the cleanup in Southport. And it's really important that that story is told, because that is who we are, and we have to give voice to that country. So one of the things that I've kicked off as the new Secretary of State for Media, Culture and Sport strategy, we've got to make sure that those local papers and regional papers are protected, not least because when there was so much disinformation being pumped around online, it was often local journalists who were first on the scene and were saying, hey, that's not what's happening here at all. And they were penetrating that disinformation, myth busting for people, and helping to create calm in communities that were feeling very anxious, and we lose them at our peril.
Do you have thoughts about where that can go? Because the news industry has been in trouble for a long time. Cairncross Review recommended about 5-6 years ago some public funding for local news in particular. Do you think there would ever be a case for that?
I do, or Rachel, who's probably around here somewhere, will give me a ticking off. But I think there is a case for funding news. Has to be. It's not our job, unlike the last Tory government. I don't think it's at all for governments to be telling broadcasters or newspapers what they can and can't print, what they can and can't say, who they can and can't feature. That's a question for them. Our job is to create the framework in which good journalism can thrive independently of government, and that we deal with disinformation. So Peter Cowell's doing the online safety bill, and is making sure that we implement that so that we can deal with the stuff online. But I am also looking at, for example, how we make sure that local and regional media gets a fair hearing online. One of the issues is that the big online companies like the Googles and the Facebooks often don't promote their content in the same way that they promote others. And we need to provide a fair playing field for local and regional papers, because more and more they're reaching people online, not in print. And it's something that we've been talking to the industry about. I think there's a great appetite for reform. And I'm really confident that we can get there after all these years of people talking about it, but actually in reality doing very little.
Amazing. I'm going to bring in another audience question at this point, which David asked. Brazil banned Twitter. Can we please?
I think the short answer is probably no. But there's what do I want to say about this? I mean, the first thing is obviously people vote with their feet with these things, and I think those people who've been dismayed, as I have, that my algorithm seems to just throw up stuff that will make me angry. I find it very difficult to find actual news on X. And so during the leadership contest, my campaign manager took it off my phone. I think it's made me a far calmer person and a far better politician, to be honest, because that online echo chamber is not the real world. And the less time that I spend looking at that, the more time that I spend in the actual country in which we live, and I understand it far, far better. But I think the other thing for me is that we are living through what is a technological and media revolution. We've been living through it for quite some time. And, I read this incredible book when I was writing my book. I read this incredible book about the invention of the printing press. And, in the 50 years after the printing press was invented, more books were published than in the hundreds of years before. And it was enormously disruptive, and it was also a great leveller. The gatekeepers lost their power. Everyone could be heard, but because everyone could be heard, no one could be heard. And disinformation and untruths could circulate very, very quickly. And it caused a lot of societal instability and upheaval, and took actually hundreds of years to really settle down. If that sounds familiar, it did to me. I think we're living through one of those moments again. And the challenge isn't to stop the technology. The challenge is how we respond to the technology and how we create the right conditions. And that's why I think taking action about some of the way that algorithms work and the online disinformation, the work that Peter's leading on, is really important, because it can be a force for good. I remember sitting with a group of children from Childline a few years ago, and they were showing me how it works now, where you can when I was little, if you were, Esther Ranson used to come on our TV screens and say, if you're suffering child abuse, go to a payphone, ring us up. That's enormously difficult for kids. Now they can reach out for help just at the touch of a button. And they were saying to me, please don't take this away from us. This is incredibly important. But they're also a generation that is massively, massively affected by the online bullying, online abuse that they see. Our challenge is to make sure that that is a safe space and a decent, healthy, democratic space that works in the interests of the many, not the few. If we're honest, we haven't got there yet, but we have to get there. The challenge is not to stop the technology, it's how to properly respond to it.
Fantastic. I want to go back to what you were saying about the riots and how you engage the football clubs, faith leaders, that kind of exercise that was launched, because I think the moment that the riots stopped, there are so many lessons about how government, institutions, local leaders and communities and citizens can make change happen. So in that exercise of calling round all those local actors, did that contribute to ending the riots, do you think?
I think it helped. I think certainly it helped, because for years now people have been telling me that more and more online, the debate is becoming more vicious, more toxic. They can't really trust what they're hearing, but people don't really want to get involved in challenging some of this, because you get pulled into it and then you become the target for it. And what I think we managed to do with the football clubs in particular was provide something around which the decent majority could coalesce. And that's what leadership looks like. And those clubs were showing leadership in their own communities. These are, it's why I feel so passionately about the football bill that we're introducing, because these are institutions, as the Tory MP, Jessie Norman, once said, that help to shape and define us as we help to shape and define them. They're really important to the sense of place, identity, community, who we are as a people, who we are as a town, a village or a city. So I think it helped, but I'm not under any illusions that just by ending that outpouring of violence, have we solved the problem? So, you know, where these people thrive is in the conditions in which people feel very, very anxious, very, very uneasy, where they see their town centres falling apart, where they see rises in knife crime and stabbings in communities where traditionally there haven't been anything like that, where they see half the houses on their street bought up by Serco, often for asylum accommodation, and overnight you go from living on a street where you know your neighbours to living in a very transient community where people are only there for a few months, where all the houses have been turned into HMOs and the litter bins are overflowing because nobody's thought about what it would mean to have 3 families in a house instead of 1. And this is not, you know, this is the decent majority who aren't racist at all. My town has always been incredibly welcoming of asylum seekers and refugees, but those houses are disproportionately concentrated in parts of the country, in parts of the community even, where the housing is very cheap. And so the people who are already struggling, who are worried about their kids, worried about the future, then have to endure that as well. We've got to have better systems for this. We've got to listen to what people are telling us, and we've got to address the underlying causes of that. Now, I'm really proud because I think our government is doing exactly that. Yvette has been working day and night to get a grip on the asylum chaos that we inherited and to build a better and fairer and safer system. Rachel is pushing ahead, not just with growing the economy, but really importantly, as part of her story, good jobs in every community. And my job and Bridget's is to make sure that we don't just have those good jobs, but the kids there can get them. I can't tell you how fed up I am about, over the last few months, I have had so many proposals for investment come across my desk that have not thought about whether young people locally or the community will benefit. And I'm not just interested in a thriving film industry in Sunderland. I want to make sure that those kids in Sunderland can get those jobs, because right now we've got projects that were being developed under the Tories where you've got good, well-paid, skilled, interesting careers being created in parts of the country where they don't currently exist. And the kids can see those jobs being created, but could no more get to the moon than they can dream of having those opportunities themselves. And I am absolutely determined that